This is Modern Mindset, the show where we discuss the psychology and emotion of business and finance. I'm your host, Adam Cox, and joining me today is Karen Bishi, who is a career and life coach. Welcome to the show.
Hello, hi Adam. Thanks for inviting me.
You're very welcome. And today we're going to be talking about a topic which sounds unusual, but actually, apparently, is kind of more prevalent than we would think. And we're talking about imposter syndrome. Can you first of all tell us what this is? What does it mean?
Absolutely. Imposter syndrome is how it's referred to more recently. When it was actually first discovered, it was called the imposter phenomenon, and it was back in 1978, and it was a study done by Pauline Clance and Susan Imes, a study of 150 successful women. And what they noticed was that although these women were highly successful, they were actually feeling like that they were a fraud, and that they were kind of tricking people into thinking that they were intelligent enough to have achieved what they've achieved, and always living under constant fear that they would be found out, or that they were kind of undermining their own achievements, essentially.
So this kind of tip that quite often we hear in kind of confidence and kind of career circles of fake it till you make it, is that contributing to this imposter syndrome, that people actually feel that they are faking it?
I think there's certainly an element of that, and I think that it's actually provides the difficulty where if people feel like that they're a fake in their situations, then they never fully experience the value of their own achievements. I think, in a sense, with the other thing you've talked about faking it till you make it, I think there's a sense of that kind of incongruity about kind of really feeling like they need to have kind of integrity, and that their achievements are kind of aligned with their beliefs, really.
So as a full transparency, confession to make, I think I had imposter syndrome. Because when I was 23 years old, I set up a business, and I didn't really know what I was doing. But I didn't think I would be credible enough or respected enough at that age. So I faked it until I made it. And I had a serviced office in Covent Garden, so the business would look bigger. I didn't call myself the managing director. I said I was an account director in the company. And for a good year, I just felt I was completely blagging it. Was that the right thing to do?
Well, I think that can be helpful, actually, to kind of give yourself more credit than you perhaps have at that point in time, in order to kind of boost your self-esteem. I think with imposter syndrome, it can be the opposite. In fact, it's not necessarily that people are kind of giving themselves more credit than they deserve. They deserve the credit that they're being given from externally. So people kind of holding them in high esteem. It's the internal sense of that not matching with how they feel inside.
So to the outside
really
world, they look very successful,
Yeah,
and inside they're feeling like a bit of a fraud.
Absolutely. So there's some famous examples of people that have talked publicly about feeling like an imposter in their situation, such as Emma Watson, for instance. She said after she finished the Harry Potter films that she felt like, she wasn't, kind of accomplished enough to be able to kind of continue with her career and go on and do other things. And therefore she felt that although she'd had all this success, she still wasn't kind of believing herself to be of the value that necessarily other people kind of held her in.
Do you think the way in which people achieve success can actually influence whether or not people have an imposter syndrome? Because in Emma Watson's case, yes, clearly she had talent, and but at the same time, it was a big open casting. She was kind of plucked from obscurity. Whereas some people may have attempted over decades to become an actor or an actress and feel that they've earned their stripes. Do you feel like the way in which people achieve success can contribute towards that?
Potentially, yeah, but I think there are a whole range of things that kind of interplay. So it may be as a result of the way that a person has been raised and the kind of thought patterns that they kind of get into about their achievements throughout their lives, not necessarily just in their career. So it might be a pattern that's kind of been created as a result of like going through schooling and the grades that they achieved at school, whether they achieved within, kind of Girl Guides or whatever, the activities that they've done growing up. So it can become like a pattern of thinking. And it's often goes along with certain kind of personality traits as well, like perfectionism, for instance, because even though it's almost perfect, it's never quite good enough in terms of the achievements. And as I say, it can also be a kind of feeling that sort of I'm everything that I've done, but perhaps it's occurred due to luck, or like you say, so that could be linking back to Emma Watson. There's quite a few famous people that have also kind of come forward as talking about this. Tom Hanks is one. Maya Angelou, the poet and writer, and she talked about having written 11 books, and each time thinking, oh, maybe this time I'll get found out.
Getting found out. And yet there's high-profile cases of people that perhaps should have imposter syndrome but probably don't. Donald Trump being one of them. Yeah. He kind of managed to kind of find himself in a very kind of influential situation. Does he feel like an imposter, do you think?
I think it's highly unlikely. I think he's the other end of the spectrum. He's got an inflated sense of himself rather than holding himself in low regard.
I think he feels that everyone has already found him out and he doesn't care anyway, is potentially the...
No, he's got that arrogance, hasn't he?
So let's kind of talk about less of the kind of high-profile names that we might know, but if someone's listening right now and they're thinking, right, Karen, you're describing me. I'm here. I head up a team. I'm running a business. I shouldn't be here. I'm not deserving of this. They're going to find me out any time now. What can they do? What kind of things could they do, or should they just kind of turn down the volume of those inner voices and ignore it?
I think one of the key things that people can do, firstly, it's kind of recognising that that's happening. I think it's about understanding about and getting more information about how other people view them and their achievements. And actually, there are some exercises that I do with the clients that I work with around just helping them to begin to actually recognise the way in which they talk to themselves about themselves and talk to others about themselves as well. And so really looking at the language that we're using, we all have inner voices that, kind of particularly in circumstances when we're feeling fearful, that might kind of either help us to get through that situation or to actually hold us back. And it's actually kind of recognising the language that we're using, because our subconscious brain is listening and we'll be taking on those messages and actually kind of helping you to kind of either boost your self-esteem or to actually kind of hold you back, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. It can kind of build you up. It's kind of inner cheerleaders or inner kind of critics and things like that.
But as I say, it's kind of in NLP I use neuro-linguistic programming, and in NLP it's talked about as taking a meta perspective, so disassociating from yourself and actually taken an observer position to actually just hear the language that we're using. And then once you've been able to do that, it's possible to then stop yourself at the point and actually change the way that you communicate about yourself and to yourself.
So what are the kind of language patterns that someone with imposter syndrome may use to describe themselves compared to someone that clearly doesn't have that?
Well, I think it's on, first of all, before we talk about that, I think it's on a scale. So I think that it's not either you have it or you don't. It's not a kind of a disorder. And that's why that, when it was first created, it was called a phenomenon rather than a syndrome.
Right.
So I think it is on a scale, and I think people have it to kind of a greater or lesser degree.
So it's shades of grey rather than black or white.
Yeah, I absolutely believe that. And I think that then by actually kind of recognising, you can kind of move yourself along that scale by by some of the exercises, as I say, about kind of recognising the way that the language patterns that you're using. So, for instance, it may be that you get a fantastic job, and it could be that you're then speaking to other people or even to yourself and saying, oh, well, perhaps there weren't any other candidates that showed up for interview.
Okay.
Or it was just lucky. I was just happened to be in the right place at the right time. Oh, okay. So I answered the questions correctly. If they'd have delved a bit deeper into me, they'd have realised that actually I'm not quite up to this.
Right.
And so it's all of those things rather than actually kind of owning that success and saying, and actually giving credit to those people that have interviewed you. They're no fools, and they've actually chosen you for the job. So it's like, okay, so I am capable enough. They believe in me. I should believe in myself, and moving forward on that basis. And those changes can make a big difference. I had one client who I'm sure she won't mind me telling you this, that was nominated for an Inspiring Women Award, and when we were talking about it, they were kind of saying, oh, well, the people who nominated me, perhaps they had never worked with very many other women. And it's like, well, probably have you listened to that, and I think the other thing that I often will do with clients is help them to look at themselves as if they were somebody else. So put themselves in the position of a friend or of a colleague that has worked with them, and give themselves an appraisal as if they were their own best line manager.
Yeah.
And how could that help them with, it's not a question of not being able to kind of listen to constructive feedback to help you grow, but sometimes we only give ourselves the kind of the negative feedback and don't look at how it can constructively and how we can motivate ourselves to move forward.
Yeah, and I think that's quite a common phenomenon where people will brush off the compliments and really dwell and replay any kind of criticism or kind of feedback and that kind of stuff. But it's a really interesting thing, because it kind of dawns on me that there are certain people that, it's not necessarily whether or not someone's got away with it or not, whether they deserve it or not, but really it's about how they feel about whether or not they're in a position that they've earned or not. And I think it's about attribution, isn't it? It's if they kind of put it down to their competency, their abilities, then they're owning their success. Whereas if they're saying, right, well, I'm here down to, family connection, or down to luck, or down to, lack of diligence on the person that kind of hired me, it's kind of a different feeling. That kind of element of dissociation, is it useful sometimes to find people that, anonymously actually give their feedback on kind of, does that achieve the same element of that kind of meta approach and dissociation?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and it doesn't even have to be anonymous. It can be really helpful to just actually talk to people and find out about what they think and getting some feedback. The other thing that's really helpful is actually to find a space to be able to talk about your own achievements. I'm always surprised when I'm working with clients who are highly successful, and then I talk to them about themselves, and they really kind of feel uncomfortable about talking about their achievements.
Is that an English thing, do you think?
I think it probably is quite cultural, yeah.
Because you don't really get this idea that Americans, if you say, well, tell me how good you are, they're not going to go all coy and shy and, there's kind of a different kind of cultural acceptance that, it's more than okay to kind of not boast, but just kind of talk about your accomplishments. Why do you think we, is perhaps generalizing here, but as a cliche, as a stereotype, why do you think English people are less comfortable showcasing their achievements?
I think perhaps I think perhaps they're worried about other people's reactions to it, and about how other people might kind of respond, and whether they'll get support back or whether they'll be seen kind of as, like you say, it's boasting, it's not kind of culturally as acceptable. But I also think, when this imposter phenomenon was first identified, it was identified as being a phenomenon that affected women, purely women. Since then, research has shown that men also suffer from it. We've talked about Tom Hanks. But I do think that there is a question of structural sexism and racism, meaning that it is actually more difficult for women to put themselves forward, that there are additional barriers that women experience. And I work predominantly with women, and I know that can be the case where you've got, fight a little bit harder to get to put yourself forward, and actually not necessarily encouraged to be the one that is kind of it's not considered to be very ladylike, I guess, in a sense. And so it can be a thing that, like, women are not necessarily socialised into kind of bragging about their
do you think there's an element of tall poppy syndrome where, if people get too big, people around them think it's their job to kind of put them down a peg or two, who do you think you are? Whereas, I heard someone say that if you see someone driving, let's say, an expensive car in America, the overall mindset is, well, good for them, they've done well. Whereas in this country, there's more likelihood to say, oh, look at that person showing off, look at that person, who do they think they are? Do you think that cultural element, kind of makes people, is there a possibility? It's not necessarily that there is this kind of feeling that they're an imposter, but is it people kind of trying to manage their own expectations and saying, well, look, but put it down to luck. As you see with sports people, sometimes they just want a trophy. They're clearly very talented. Oh, I got lucky, I guess.
Yeah, but imposter syndrome, when it was first kind of talked about, was a study from the States. And so although we talk about Americans kind of being more comfortable with kind of self-promotion, like, once again, I guess people can self-promote but still kind of feel like they're not quite achieving it's not aligned with how they feel internally. I think also with social media these days as well, there is a kind of a feeling that you do need to kind of put yourself out there or present a certain image of the way that you are. But like you say, it's about kind of having that alignment really with not just how the outside world views you, but actually that aligning with your own kind of feeling internally of those two kind of matching up is kind of creates real value in that in what you're achieving.
Yeah, totally. And it's a really interesting point about kind of technology, social media, even things like filters on kind of photo sharing apps. Do you think that's going to lead to a contribution of more people feeling that they're a bit of a fraud?
Absolutely. Yeah, I do. Because I think people are conscious of putting their best self out there, really, to create an image of themselves, which doesn't include, kind of necessarily how they look when they first wake up in the morning, or when they're having a really bad day, or when they don't want to leave the house, or all of those feelings that are internal. They and also I think it's the thing about imposter syndrome is often people feel like they're the only ones that are facing it, and actually realizing that it's a really common thing that lots of people experience can really help. And I think because everybody tends to share their best self on social media platforms, it's also perhaps has the tendency to increase people's feeling of isolation, that they feel like a fraud, and that other people are kind of, what's the saying about living your best life and all that? That they're out there kind of.
So there's an element of comparison, the feeling everyone else is deserved of their success apart from me.
Yeah. I was even reading about a group where they kind of created a self-help type style group, because group therapy can be helpful in terms of understanding that other people are in the same boat. And the woman said that in the first few sessions it was quite helpful, and then by the third they'd come to the feeling like actually that all the other people might be thinking that they were like saying that they were imposters, but really they were the one that was really experiencing it.
So it's only happening to me.
Yeah.
Which I guess, comes with it with an element of significance. Nobody understands but me. I think I saw a TED talk once which kind of touched on this feeling of not being deserved of kind of results, and the advice there was to kind of literally fake it till you make it with the right kind of body posture, tonality, and kind of play the part of as if you did. Act as if really is the key thing there. Do you think that can be helpful for those people that don't feel that they deserve it? It's just to kind of, just act as if you do deserve it and then see if that makes you feel better.
I think it can certainly help with achieving things. I think often people with this imposter syndrome actually kind of work harder to kind of make sure that they're over-prepared for things, for instance. And so rather than kind of faking it till they make it, they're kind of almost doing more than they need to in order to kind of make sure that they've got all bases covered. But I do think the aspect of going in and faking it till you make it is almost like just actually kind of changing the way that you kind of talk about yourself and helping to change that perception of yourself can really, really help and move people forward.
When you're coaching people that may have imposter syndrome, is there a worry on their side that perhaps this feeling that they're going to get found out is actually unleashing a lot of motivation and discipline and dedication, and actually if they suddenly accept it, that their motivation is going to go right down? Is that ever a worry at all?
I wouldn't say it's necessarily been a worry for my clients, but I do know that it is talked about sometimes as being something that can be that can help people achieve more.
So like actually doing it deliberately to kind of...
Yeah, well, I don't know about that, but I think certainly that it's recognised that the traits that often go alongside the imposter phenomenon are something that can actually make people will work harder because they'll kind of need to feel the need that they have to do sort of 110% preparation or whatever in order to just be good enough.
Yeah.
I think the issue with that is that the things that the people are achieving, that they never really gain that kind of full value from it, that they don't get the joy of the achievement because sort of at the point when they achieve whatever it is that they set out to achieve, it's often reported that people feel a kind of a sense of just relief that they've not been found out,
rather than glory.
That they've got to the next stage, and always striving but never actually kind of feeling the comfort and the joy and the excitement of kind of, yes, I've done this, and kind of that feeling of pride really in their own.
Because in a way they're living their life through a caricature or someone else rather than who they really are. It's not them achieving the success, it's this kind of imposter that they're pretending to be. What would be your top, let's say, 3 tips for if someone was out there thinking, right, I've got this, definitely it's me, I'm an imposter. What would be your top 2 or 3 tips to kind of help them to, let's say, break free from that kind of syndrome?
Well, I would say get a coach for sure, of course. No, I think coaching or even if it's informal is really very helpful because the value of coaching is that it can help you to be able to see your own self from a different perspective, gain a fresh perspective on your own life, help you to kind of identify what it is that you're really looking to achieve in life, and help you to put steps in place to be able to experience that in line with whatever your values are, which that can really help. I think the second thing is around what I was talking about, around looking at your daily habits. So our lives are made up with so many habits and the language patterns we use, as I've talked about. Just being able to notice how you're talking to yourself and to be able to stop yourself and say, actually, hang on a minute, would I talk to somebody else in the way that I've just spoken to myself? Or would I, if I knew somebody else who'd achieved what I'd achieved, would I be downplaying it in the way that I do about myself? We're often great at supporting other people, friends and colleagues, but we're not always our own best support. And just really considering also how is it serving you? What are the benefits you're gaining from those ways of behaving and the ways of kind of thinking about yourself and communicating about yourself, and how could things be different to you? So imagining another way, and then using that as a way of motivating you to kind of create change. And habits, once we recognise that there is something that we want to change about our lives, and actually recognising the value of how life could be different as a result can be really, really motivating in making those changes happen.
No, perfect. And as a career coach, outside of imposter syndrome, what would be your top coaching advice that you would give someone that maybe doesn't suffer from imposter syndrome but just wants to take their career to the next level? What would be your kind of golden nugget of information for them?
I would say, firstly, know what it is that's really driving you. So what are your core values and what is it that you ultimately want to achieve? It's essentially thinking about it in the same way as you look at your work life. Within work, you'll have a strategy for your organisation, and I've looked beyond kind of just making decisions after decisions. So really thinking about what it is that you want to achieve in the future, and then looking at what are the steps that you can take to get there. So people often have big dreams, but they feel out of reach. And I think what we often do in coaching is help people to break it down into kind of more achievable bite-sized chunks, and then that momentum that's created by achieving steps in the right direction make a huge difference, and create the motivation to move forward to whatever the goal is.
That's fantastic. And if someone's listening and they want you to be their coach, where can they find information on you?
Okay, so I have a website. It's KarenBishi.com. My surname is spelt Bishi, so it's KarenBishi.com. You can also find me on Facebook, on Twitter and LinkedIn, because Karen Bishi is an unusual name. It's quite easy to find me.
No competition there. Karen, you've been a fantastic guest. Thanks for joining me on the show.
Thank you.
And to you at home, thanks for joining me. My name is Adam Cox. This is Modern Mindset. Join me again next week for more.